excited to be here with a tutorial. It's been over a year since my last one, and I'm just really happy to be back, and I appreciate all of your patience. As promised, we're going to be painting this pink lotus flower, and I'm doing this video in real time. There's no fast forwarding, no music in the background, because a lot of you had suggested that I just cut the music out so you could hear me more clearly, but Poet decided to add a lot of background noise and sound effects. So I apologize for that. You will hear those later on in the video, and I couldn't figure out how to edit those out, so bear with us, sorry. So I don't think I've ever talked about this in any of my other videos, and I've had a lot of people ask me if I prep my canvases first, and I have to admit, on a lot of my tutorials I don't, I just paint right on the canvas, but it is a very smart idea to put a coat. I use gesso, white gesso, can you see this? This one's just Artist Loft from Michael's Art Supply, and you just get a big brush or any size brush, and you just want to coat the whole canvas with this gesso first, because what that's going to do is kind of seal the canvas so the paint adheres better, it will last longer, and it's just a good idea to always prep your canvas first. I should have talked about that in previous videos, but I never did. So just paint the whole thing, give it about an hour at least to dry. Just do a pretty solid coat. Get all your edges. And sometimes you can paint it a little extra thick if you want more texture on the canvas. You can do it in different directions, and you can kind of see the streaks of the paint or of the gesso on there. So if you want to get a little bit more texture, just do a few layers, let it dry, do another layer if you want it a little bit thicker. I'm just doing kind of a thin, thin coat, solid enough to cover everything, but I like to sort of crisscross and do it in a few different directions to get a little bit of that texture showing through. And it's very simple. And then just let that dry. So with this design, we're gonna have a lot of drawing to start off with. It hopefully won't be too tricky. I went ahead and did a little miniature version of this beforehand just to work out the details and the colors, and I'm going to be using two different pencils. So I'm using a B pencil, and I'm using a 2H. So the B stands for black of the lead, which is a softer pencil, and I always use a B or an HB or a 2B, anything with a B. I'll sketch that out first. It's a little bit softer lead, like I said, and then I'll get all the designs kind of figured out and worked out, and then I'll go in once I have my design really clear. I'll take the 2H, or you can use a 4H, and I will outline it, make it a little bit more clear and like a harder outline, and then I erase over the whole thing so that the H pencil will keep the design on the canvas a little bit better, because it's a harder lead. The H stands for hardness of the lead. And then it won't smear when we do the painting, because some of those softer pencils, you'll get all that gray smeared into the paint. We don't want that. So let's just go ahead and start off. We've got the board all gessoed and ready and prepped, ready to go. So with this design, the flower, whenever you're designing something, you never want it to be right in the center, because that's just kind of boring. It's just a boring layout. So either you want to have it kind of off to the side or just a little bit shifted. So what we're going to do is just kind of eyeball it. Draw a little faint line right down the middle, just kind of divide it in half, and then the middle this way. And pretty much the flower is on this half, and then the petals kind of come over like that. So we're going to start off, we're going to draw a circle about right on this edge, and then about halfway between this line. So just really lightly, I'm just going to draw a circle. You don't want to make it too big. You want to leave some space over on this side because we're going to add petals on that side. So just do a light circle. It doesn't need to be perfect. And then we're going to do the petals. Let's move this so I can see this better. Move my design to the side. Okay, so let's start off with these bottom petals here. Let's do one like down on this lower left corner. Not too long. We're just going to do a little shape. You don't want it to be pointy, like a pointy leaf. It's going to be a little bit rounded at the tip, but a little bit wider at the base. So just sketch out. It doesn't have to be exactly like this, but, and then where that ends, we're going to do one kind of angling down this way. Another not too big one. A little stubby one there. And then we'll add a longer one coming out over here. Not too long, but just a little bit longer. And then let's do another one over here, kind of right where this one ends. We'll have this one go right off the edge. Like that. And then have the tip of it just go off the edge there. Hopefully you can see this okay. And then let's have one kind of close to the side of this flower, like it's just starting to open up a little bit. So we're going to have that come up. We'll just start right where these meet. And it's just going to come up a little bit, kind of close to this, and then curve it down like that. And then let's have another one up here. Let's make this one a little bit longer. You can leave a little space between these. Have that one come up. Again, not too high, but and just kind of curve it around. Let's do another one over here. So this one, let's overlap it behind both of these. So let's have that one come a little wider. We'll have that one with the tip right off the edge. There. Let's do one, a little one popping up here. Have it overlap over this. The more you overlap things, that also helps with the design too. Makes it look like there's more building behind the other one. This one's going to be just kind of a short one. Let's have that come there. We'll do a little one, a little smaller one, popping up behind that one. And then we'll do a bigger one here. Have it angle a little bit out this way. And you want to make sure like these big ones aren't, you don't want one really long and one really short. I mean, this is shorter, but the bigger ones that are opening, the petals that are opening up are going to be a little bit larger and longer. So let's have that one come up here. And then we're going to have another one kind of like we did this one. Like the flower was just starting to open. So it's going to be kind of close to this edge here of the flower, the base of the flower. Let's have that kind of curve around, and it's going to end right here. Just round the top a little bit. Make sure it's overlapping over this big one a little bit. And then we'll do one little skinny one behind it, like that one's opening up behind it. I'm just going to have that meet again right here and sort of come out, curve around like that. And we'll do one more right here. So let's have that one sort of opening up and coming out this direction. You can have it curve a little bit. And then it'll come down overlapping this right here. Let's have that come up like that. Okay, that's going to be our main design. Then we're going to add like a little lily pad. Not like a little lily pad, we're going to add a little lily pad. That's hard to say. We'll just have that come up in the corner, curve around. Again, it doesn't have to be exactly like mine. And then we'll do another one right here. Instead of having this one come in the corner too, because that'll look too perfect if there's one in each corner, we'll have it come up from the bottom a little bit here. And let's curve this around. And you don't want them to all be the exact same shape. So I'm actually going to make this one a little larger, because right now they're kind of similar size. So let's just have this come out a little bit bigger. Do a little curve in there. curve back up like that. I'm gonna make this one a little smaller, so you just see a little bit peeking out the edge there. And then we'll do one right here. Not in the corner, but coming down. Have it overlap behind this. And then come there. Actually, I think I want to come down here a little more so you see some green here too. Let's bring this up and this up. Kind of weird looking, but it'll be okay. Let's erase that. Come up a little more like that. Okay. I think that'll be a good start. So now what I want to do, now that I have it worked out, I'm going to use my 2H pencil and I'm just going to draw this a little bit harder. Whenever you draw the first time around, you want to draw really light until you get your design exactly how you want it. So I'm just going to go over it with a little more pressure. And this hard pencil is much harder to erase. So you want to make sure you have it just the way you want it before you do it with the harder lead. So just outline all those parts. Don't outline the circle because we're gonna be creating some more petals with our paint once we get to that. I'm gonna change that shape a little, make it a little more curvy. And after you got that, now you can erase over the whole thing, and because this hard lead is a lot harder, it's not gonna erase. So I like to use a kneaded eraser. These are great because they don't leave all the little flaky things all over the place. I don't know if you guys have used these before. Hopefully you can see that. This one is by Generals. I got that at Michael's. You can find them online, but kneaded eraser or malleable. Okay, so now you're just gonna go over the whole thing and erase. You can erase pretty hard and that design will stay behind. Actually, let's lightly put that circle back in so I don't confuse anybody. I'm not gonna do that really hard, but I'm just gonna get a basic circle shape in there. Erase. As long as you get most of that soft lead off there, it'll be okay. Sometimes I don't even erase. I just paint. It might smear the lead a little bit, but the more layers of paint you do, the more it covers up. But okay, so that's good for now. And let's draw back in a couple of the lines that we lost. A few little spots. Well, that's my B. The H. Just in case you get confused. I know what goes where, but I don't want to confuse anybody else. Let's put that back in. There, there. Actually, that circle comes around a little wider, so this wraps around. Okay. All right, so we got our, oh, by the way, I'm working on a 12 by 12 inch canvas. You can do any size you want. You just might need slightly larger brushes if you're doing a really big canvas. But that's what I'm working on today. So we have our primary colors, like always. We've got our primary blue or brilliant blue, warm yellow, Quinacridone Magenta, and white. That's all we're gonna need for this one. And we're gonna mix all of our own colors. So I'm gonna start off with my 5/8 angular brush. And we're gonna do the background first. So let's take a big scoop of blue and start with just a little bit of yellow. And we're gonna mix that up. We wanna make a blue-green color, but we want it more on the blue side. I am so out of practice with this. It's been a year since my last tutorial. I can't believe it. Hopefully hopefully you can see what I'm doing here. I think I'm going to move the camera closer because it is really far back right now. Okay, hopefully that's better. All right, so we're mixing up our blue and yellow. And I'm painting on a paper palette pad, which is like wax paper. And I love this because it has the white behind it. When you scrape the paint, you can really see what color you've got going on. And this is a really beautiful, that's a little too, oh, actually, I like that. All right, so we're doing kind of a deep teal color. So we're just gonna paint around all the parts. Ooh, that's so pretty. And you can do it any color you like. If you want it more blue, it's water, so water can really be any color. It just depends on all the elements that are around it. Like the sky, water could be pink. If you have like a pink sunset, then your water's gonna be reflecting that and be a pink shade. If you have a blue sky, it might be a little more of a blue color. It just depends what's underneath the water, depends what the atmosphere is around it, what's reflecting down on it. So you really can't go wrong. You can do any color you want. But since the flower is going to be pink, we want it to have a really nice contrast. So I think this color looks really pretty against the pink flower. If you need to add just a little bit of water, just dip your brush in the water, stir it around, it'll be a lot more flowy for you. It's going to be pretty streaky probably because these colors are kind of transparent, so don't worry about that. We're going to do more layers and it'll get rid of a lot of those streaks. Don't be too concerned if you get a little bit on the edges of the petals because we'll paint right over those too. Just try your best to get around the edges. And I've talked about this before. The reason why I use only the primary colors when I'm doing tutorials is because I want you to get really good with mixing all of your own colors, because if you run out of this, say you get the perfect shade and you don't know how you got there, it makes it really difficult later. If you want to get that exact shade again, it's hard to go back in. And if you need to touch up little spots later, you want to remember exactly how you got that color so you can match it perfectly. So I recommend always just practice mixing colors. Like look at a paint swatch book. We'll go grab one from like Home Depot or something, and just practice trying to mix colors to get that exact shade. You'll get really good at it if you practice, practice, practice. When I paint my murals, I always just I go to Home Depot, I buy a gallon of the purest red, the purest yellow, and the purest blue I can find, and a gallon of black, a gallon of white, and I mix all my own colors on site. So that's where I just started, only because I was broke and a college student, and I didn't have money to buy 50 different colors of paint when I started painting murals, so I would just have to mix all my own colors, and now it's benefited me because I'm pretty good with making any color I want. So, and that's just from years of practice. I've never painted a mural where I used colors directly out of a tube, unless I'm using like the pure red, pure yellow, pure blue in a mural, but yeah, I mix all of my own colors just using the primaries. Sometimes when I'm doing a canvas painting like at home, I will use colors that are out of the tube if I need a certain shade and I just need it quicker. It's just easier to pull it right out of the tube, and then I'll usually tweak it with my own bits of paint too, but it's just good to know that base. And make sure you get all your edges. Basically, you just want to get all the canvas color covered, and then we can tweak it and add some more shades of color now. Okay, so it looks really splotchy right now because it's not real solid. Okay, so now I'm gonna add a few different shades of color. So I'm gonna take, I wanna add a little bit more of a greenish tone. So I'm gonna take a little bit of yellow. I'm just gonna mix it into some of that color we already had. Maybe, actually, let's, before we add the white, let's just, that's really green. Take a little bit of white. I'm just gonna add little bits here and there and kind of blend it in. A little more white. And again, this is just, do it with what colors you like. If you want to do it just like mine, then you can follow along with what I'm doing, but feel free to do your own thing. Gonna add a little more yellow, a little more blue, a little more white. Yeah, I like those little bits of green. Don't make it too green though, because you want this green of the lily pad to stand out also. So we're gonna keep this pretty dark, keep the water pretty dark, so then the bright green of the lily pads will stand out. And if you want it really smooth and blended, then just light feathery touches will smooth it out. Keeping your paint wet helps you make a nice smoother blend. If you want it a little more abstract and rough looking, you can just leave these little swipes, these swatches. I like a little bit of a mix. It's getting a little dry. I'm going to dip my brush in the water. Keep it a little bit wetter. A little white, a little yellow. That's really light, but we'll just blend it in. And we are going to go back in afterwards and add a dark shadow around some of these. And we'll probably go back in with a little bit of the lighter on the edges, like on the sample here. We're going to add these dark shadows, and then we're going to add a little bit of lighter right around the edges, just so it pops even more. But we'll probably come back and do that later. Okay, I think that's good for now. And then, well, let me get a little more up next to these edges here. And then I'm going to go a little darker, a little more solid along these edges. So I'm going to make some more of that original color with the blue and a little bit of yellow. I'm just going to go right along this top edge, bottom corners. I always think it looks nice when there's a little bit of a vignette feel where it's a little darker on the edges and gets a little lighter towards the center. That also puts the focus onto the flower more. Make a little more of the, oop, too much yellow. A little more of that lighter, blend it out. Okay, I think we're good for now. Clean off your brush. Now we're gonna make these lily pad green colors. So let's take a scoop of yellow. This time we're gonna have more yellow than blue. Actually, I might have enough on my brush just to mix that up. Let's see, let's put a little more blue. The blue goes a long way, so you only need a tiny bit. So we can start off a little darker and then we'll add lighter highlights. So just get that whole thing covered. Don't forget your sides. I'm gonna need more paint. See, I didn't even mix it up perfectly. You don't need to mix it perfectly for this part because we're gonna have a lot of different shades of green in this. So just get the base color. And then the center of the lily pad's right here. So if you keep your brush strokes, once you get it all on there, then you can take your brush and then the streaks will be going in the direction that eventually you're gonna have all the streaks going. So I'm just kind of coming out from the end and pointing in towards the center and draw some little lines. You know what I mean? So just, I'm using the flat part of my brush. I'm just swiping it towards the center. This one, get it all covered. The sides. And then you figure the center of this one is about right here. So you're gonna go in towards the center. And this one. Actually, I'm gonna flatten that out a little more. So the yellow is so transparent that it's not covering up over the blue background. So I'm gonna take just a little bit of white because I want to reshape this a little. I like that a little better. Maybe come up a little higher. It's a great thing about acrylic paint. You can change your design as you go. All right, get the sides. And then I just realized I covered up. I had a little bit coming down here and I lost that. So let's add that back in. Let's see. Now we're gonna take the streaks in. If the center of this lily pad was about right here, then these would go towards that center. Okay, now we're gonna add a little bit of highlight. So let's take a little yellow, a little bit of white. We'll make a light yellowy color. And I'm using the flat side of my brush and I'm just flicking it towards the center. Just like from the edge. And I'm not going all the way to the edge, I'm leaving a little bit of that green. You can turn your brush sideways, wideways, back and forth. And I'm just doing a bunch of streaks, keeping it kind of random and flicking it towards the center of the lily pad. Do the same thing down here. Oh, that was really thick. You just want a little bit on your brush. That's a little too solid, so let's take some more of that darker green. Make a little more of that. And you can kind of go back and forth with the darker green, the lighter green. Just to make a lot of different shades of green. So it's not flat, one solid color. Do the same thing over here. And I'm using the pointy part of my brush. Just flicking it towards that, where the center would be. I want a little more yellow in there. The more shades of color you have, the more interesting your painting will be. So never just use two shades, a darker and a lighter. You want to do as many shades as you can. Even throwing in some other colors, like if I was doing a commission painting for somebody or a final painting, I'd have blues in there and pinks, and I'd have a lot of colors. It'd be overall green, but I'd probably add lots of different shades, which I'm just kind of keeping this tutorial a little bit more simple so it doesn't take 5 hours. Okay, throw in a few more streaks here and there just to get a little more variation. Do some lighter ones. And if you go over it too much and your paint's still wet, it's all going to blend into the same color. You don't want that. We want to keep all the different colors showing. So I think I want to do a little more dark green mixed into this bottom one. That got a little too light for me. But if you like yours the way it is, leave it. Don't touch it. Doesn't have to look exactly like mine. Now I want a little more yellow. Okay, that's good for now. And I'm going to clean off my brush. And I'm going to take my number 8 filbert, which is the we're not even using the big brush today, the biggest brush. We're just using these 3, so the in-between brush. And I'm going to take a little of that darker green color and just touch on a few of the little edges, just to make the edges a little bit darker. If your light highlights got all the way to the edge, here's where you can come in and just touch those up a little bit. And keep it kind of random. You don't want a perfect outline. You want it to be a little thinner, a little thicker here and there. And I'm not going to do that other side because we're not really seeing the other side of the lily pad on this one. We're just seeing this edge here. And I'm going to clean off my brush. And I'm going to take my tiniest brush, my number 2 round. Can you see that? Hopefully that's focusing. And we're going to take a little bit of white and a teeny bit of yellow. I want it like a really, really light yellow. And I'm just going to touch on a few little edges here and there. Again, not a perfect outline. Just a little squiggle here and there. Oops, that went way off the edge. That's okay. A little more yellow in there. Okay. Smooth that out a little bit. Okay, let's just blend that in. Got a little weird looking. Okay. Clean that brush off. And then we're going to add a few little ripples in the water along this edge. Actually, first, before we do that, let's take the dark watercolor that we did and make sure it's dark right along the edge of the water. So it creates a little bit of a shadow feeling. Your water might be this dark on the edge. I got lighter up to the edge, so I'm just adding a little bit of that darker right along the edge. Paint's almost dry. I'm just going to put a little water in there, pull up what I have left on the palette. Okay, now with a tiny bit of white and that same tiny brush, I'm going to swirl it around in a little bit of that water color. I'm going to get my brush wet so it's nice and flowy. And don't want it bright white. I'm just going to use the tip of the brush and just really lightly do a few little squiggles, following the shape of the lily pad. Not a complete outline, but just, you know what, that's a little too dark. Put a little more white in there. I'm going to water it down again just to make it really thin and flowy. And I'm just doing a few little squiggles right along the edge. Going with the curve of the lily pad shape. Keep it really skinny, so just try to use the very tip of the brush. And again, you don't want like perfect outlines. I'm gonna add a little more water so it's a little more subtle. If you hold your brush really lightly, make sure it's not too wet, you'll get drips. If you hold just the tip of the brush or the edge of the brush, hold it really lightly. Sometimes that gives you a little more control of not make it such a harsh line. If you keep it light, it'll just sort of flow easier. Okay. And clean your brush. Now I'm going to take the number 8 filbert again, and we're going to do this little center part of the flower. So we're going to take a scoop of magenta and a scoop of yellow, about equal parts. Mix those around. You know what? Let's do a little more yellow. So we're making kind of an orangey color. And then I'm going to take a teeny bit of blue. Barely any. I'm going to do it off to the side because it's going to be way too much. I knew it. Take a little bit of that color. A little more magenta. We're just doing kind of a dark magenta, burgundy-ish kind of color. That makes sense. And we're going to do a little circle, not on the very top, just down a little bit. Just about like right there. Doesn't have to be a perfect circle, but it's going to be the center of the flower. And then we're going to just take a little bit of white, a little bit of yellow, mix that around. Let's mix it into a little bit of this orangey color. We're going to do a few shades. We're just going to tap some texture. Just use the very tip of your brush. You just want little tiny dots. You can even use your tiny brush if you're not comfortable making tiny dots with that one. Then we'll take a little bit of the white and yellow mix and just lightly tap. This is like the little pollen, or I don't know what these parts are called, but just want a little bit of texture right in there. I'm actually going to switch to my tiny brush because even I am not getting the tiny lines I want. A little more white. And just using the tip of the brush, just do a few little dots all over. You don't want it to all blend in together. I want a little more of an orangey, bright orangey, so I'm going to take a little more yellow and a little bit of magenta. And just tap in some little dots. You can even go back to that dark color, tap in a little bit of that. So you have a mix of texture there. You can always go back in at the end and add a little more if you want. A little more of this to show up. Some of this is going to get covered up with the petals anyway, so that's good for now. Clean off your brush. Now we're going to start on that flower. I'm running out of space. Okay, so we're going to make our pinky color. So let's take a scoop of magenta. And we're going to take a little tiny bit of blue. See, I'm just taking a tiny bit. And I never mix it right into the whole pile. I always like to sort of test it off to the side to make sure I don't have too much. And then slowly sort of mix it into that pile. So we're going to start off with kind of a purpley magenta color. Okay, that'll be good to start with. And we're going to do, if you're comfortable using this big brush, go for it. If you want to switch to the filbert, that works too. So we're going to go right at the base of this circle, the bottom of the circle. We're just going to add a little bit in the center, in the base and the center of the flower there. It's going to be the shadow parts. And I'm not even going all the way to the edge. We don't need to do that yet. Again, along the base of that circle there. Let's go right along this edge, deep down in there. Need to make a little more of this color. So now I have a better feel for how much I need. I should be better at mixing it the second time. And then at the base of the flower here, because that shadow is going to be right where that petal hits the side of the center of the flower. So we're going to go right along that edge. And again, it doesn't have to cover the whole petal. It's a little more purpley. Let's add a little more magenta in there. Right along the base of the edge of this circle there. I'll do a little bit on this one, a little bit on this one. Go around this petal on the one behind it. So that's going to be in more shadow. And right up to the edge of this side on the one behind it. And it's okay if you paint the whole petal, that doesn't matter. And then on this one, right along that circle edge again. Okay, it's looking ugly. Don't worry, it's gonna get better. And then a little bit right along this little skinny petal here too. Right along the edge, up to button up to the edge of that petal that's next to it. Okay, that's a good start. Let's clean off your brush. And I'm going to switch to my number 8 filbert again. And now I'm going to add a little bit of white to this mix. I'm going to add a little bit of water as well so it's more flowy. Add a little more magenta in there so it's more pinky. And I'm going to start creating these petals. So let's just start with that one there. We're going to add a little bit of that lighter pink on the outside edges. And if your paint is still wet, hopefully it still is, it will blend nicely into the first color we added. So if you have a little bit of water mixed in with your paint, you just want to lightly go over that darker color and it should blend nicely into it. And if it doesn't, you can always take a little more of that darker mix. So remember how you mixed it. And you could just add a little bit right in there at the base again, just a little bit. And then you can take your lighter shade and sort of blend it into it. We're going to be doing several layers on these, so this isn't it, don't worry. You're going to do the whole thing. Same thing, I mean, on each of the petals. So you just want a little bit lighter towards the edge. And then Poet, oh my God. That wasn't me. I don't know if you heard that. He's a little stinker. So yeah, it's probably a good idea to have a little bit of that darker shade handy so you can just blend it as you go. Take the lighter. You might need a tinier brush for this one. This is that little skinny one because we're just seeing the little side of it. So you don't want that to get too fat. Right now it's kind of purpley looking, but that's okay. I mean, if you want it more purple, you can leave it more purple, but we're gonna lighten it up and make it more of a light pink as we go along. But like I said, the more variation of colors on anything you paint, the more professional it'll look, the more interesting it'll look. A little bit of the dark, blend it in the center. Fade it out a little. Let's add a little more white to that because it's all starting to get the same shade. Now this one, I'm keeping this edge skinnier on that side because we're seeing more of the edge of this. So this is going to be a little thicker on this side. And then a little bit skinnier on that side, but we're going to use our little tiny brush and enhance that even more after, but just to give you a heads up, we will be keeping it skinnier on that side. Taking some of my dark, blending it in. Take some of the dark, blend it in. It's getting dry, I'm letting my brush down. That was a lot lighter, but that's okay. Some of the dark, blend that out. Back to the light. Actually, this one's going to be thicker on this side too, and then it's going to be skinnier on that side. So let's take a little more of the dark and bring that over. So you're starting to see the shape forming here. Okay, let's go back and lighten up this a little bit. Okay, so now we're going to get a little lighter and a little more magenta, so it's going to be more of a pink. A little more white. And this side is going to be a little thicker because we're seeing this side, so that side isn't going to be as light because this is closest to us, so we're going to see a little bit more of that side. Here, let's just streak in. And again, if you keep your brush a little bit wet, it's easier to blend. And it'll be more of a subtle transition from the last pink shade if you're just making it a little bit lighter each time. And then with this one, these do kind of have edges, like the petal kind of curves. So we wanted to stay a little darker in the center. So we're just going to focus on making the edges a little bit lighter. Let's do the edge. Next round, we'll probably use the tiny brush to get a nice skinny edge on that. A little lighter. We can do a little bit from the tip coming down, but don't want to cover the whole thing. We want to keep it a little darker in the center. Add a little more white there. So I'm wiping off most of my paint, because if you want it to blend, you don't want to have too much paint on your brush. And let's just do this edge. And a little, whoa! Got orange on there. I'm very clumsy. Just so you know, I'm probably gonna drop lots of things. So again, just on this side, this one, let's do a little more on that side. We can do a little bit on that side. Let's put more white on here. Get a little bit lighter. Because when it dries a little darker. So sometimes it might look nice and bright when it's wet, but then it dries and it ends up all looking the same shade. So let's go back in with just a little more white. I'm just doing like a light touch. I'm sort of pushing down and flicking so I don't have a big fat solid stripe. If you just kind of flick your brush really lightly, you can get some little streaks and it's not so harsh. Go back in and lighten all those edges. Now this is going to be a little thicker on this edge and then it's going to be skinny on that edge. So we can use the same brush here, go right around to the point and curve it around. And then we can take our tiny brush and do this edge. Sorry, I'm talking with the paintbrush in my mouth. Make it a little lighter, a little white. Do a skinny edge there. Let's do this little skinny edge here too. And this little edge here. So we're just seeing the side of the petal. And then this one too, we're going to see a little more of this edge here, a little bit thicker on this side. And then pull out our little tiny brush and we'll do this edge. And curve it around. Let's do this very edge here too. A little lighter. And you'll see once it starts drying, you might need to go in and brighten up spots because it will dry darker. See right here, these are all kind of blending together. Let's put a little more white. And I have a little bit of water in there, so it's not completely harsh white. When you add a little bit of water, it thins it out, so it's not going to be as bright as the actual color. So I don't want to go too bright yet. I want the very final highlights. You always want to save the brightest highlights till the very end. Because if you do it too early, then you can't go lighter later. You want those final highlights to be the brightest pop. Let's do a little bit on there. That got weird. Let's feather that out a little bit. And just lightly brush over it so it sort of blends it in. And again, this little edge is going to be a skinny little edge. And this one will be a little thicker. Switch back to my filbert. Let's go a little medium pink so we're not so bright. So it's a gradual fade there. Do a little bit on that side too. Take some of that darker mix if you have any left, just to kind of blend that out. And you can just kind of go in if there's areas that you want to blend a little bit more. Taking kind of in between the dark and the light. It's a little more magenta mixed in, so it's a little more pink. I'm just adding a few streaks and get my brush a little wet because I've got too much dryness on my brush. A little bit of water is going to blend easier. This is my first tutorial where I'm just filming it all in real time, explaining everything as I go, so I might repeat myself a lot. Sorry about that. When I'm editing all my stuff, it's easier to cut things out, but I don't know, it'll be interesting. It will be. So I'm just kind of going in. I don't like how that's so solid and then that's a completely different color, so I'm doing in between shade, a little bit watered down, just to kind of lighten that center up a little bit. That's too harsh because the background, or this part's dry now. So I'm wetting my brush a little bit with a slightly lighter shade just to get a little more variation of color in there. But keeping it nice and dark right at the base. Make sure you don't cover up that dark that's right at the base of each of those petals, because that's going to give it all that depth and make it look more dimensional. So I'm just kind of lightening up from the top edge towards the center, but don't go all the way to the center. If that makes sense. Add a little bit of light at the tips. Just leaving it kind of streaky. It's going to dry darker, so keep that in mind. Okay, so let's work on this part now. So let's start off with, let's make more of that dark magenta color. So I'm putting a little bit of blue in the magenta. Let's put a little more magenta in there. Let's see. That's pretty dark. Let's put a little more magenta in there. That's okay. Okay, so we're gonna just add this across the whole thing. You can use your 5/8 angular, that would have been easier. I'm just still got my filbert. Either one. Actually, I'm gonna switch. I like to cover quicker. Let's just paint that whole circle. Make sure if there's any white showing. I didn't come down far enough with my color there, so I'm just going to make this circle a little bigger to cover up that white. And it's okay if there's like a little bump. We can just make that like a little petal popping up. It doesn't have to be a perfect circle. But you want to get all the white covered. And if it's really streaky, we're going to have petals wrapping around like this, so just make your brush strokes go in that direction. But most of this is going to get covered up anyway, so don't freak out too much about that. Okay, so we got that base. Now we're going to do, let's take our little tiny brush and just get your brush wet. Just any of these shades. We're just going to outline our petals to start with, just to give you a guideline. So let's start with, we're going to have a low petal here. So this one, you want it to come from the edge of this petal to about the edge of this. Start there. We're going to have, it's going to be kind of like a petal that's opening up slowly, so it's, you're not going to see the whole shape. It's going to be kind of like that. So that's going to be one petal. Then we're going to do one here. These are the ones that are kind of closed in. So let's do this first. Let's come down from here. And we don't want to go all the way to the top because we want a few little petals peeking out. So let's go about to right here. And this is going to be same kind of shape as these, but it's flat. So it's going to curve around the shape of the, like it's wrapping around that ball, if that makes sense. So we're curving that edge a little bit. And then let's do one peeking out right here. And this will be the same height as this one. So it's going to be right there. This one's on top of that one, so this will just kind of go behind that one. Then let's add part of one here. This is going to come up a little bit. Make sure you curve around the edge of this one, around that edge of the circle. Let's do another one right here. So that'll be the edge of that one. Again, it's going to kind of fold in towards the center. Let's do one here. Let's do one like right like that. So let's have this come from that edge there. A little bit of a point, not a sharp point, just a rounded point. And then we're going to have one right along this edge. So let's have this come up a little bit higher. And come down right along the side of this one. And then we'll have one peeking out here. And we're just going to have like little tips of some of them peeking out, overlapping a little. These are just little hints of petals kind of peeking out. And then let's do one sort of peeking up over the top there. And one peeking up over the top there. And there, let's do one more over here. And then we're just going to do a couple little arches. This is going to be implying that this is the top edge of, let's do another one here. The top edge, we're just going to overlap with a few little lines, little curved lines. Okay, so we got that. Now I'm going to switch to my filbert brush again. And we're going to probably have to mix some more paint because mine's dry. So let's take a little more white and a little magenta. I'm going to get my brush a tiny bit wet. Put a little more magenta in there. Get a little more pinky. I'm wiping off most of my paint because I don't want too much on it. And I'm going to start at the top of this little curved petal and I'm just flicking it down. So I might get some streaks and that's okay. Flicking it, flicking it. And then we're going to do this next one. I'm going to leave a little bit of this dark showing because I want to remember where that petal starts and stops. And I'm not going all the way down to the bottom because I want to keep this a little darker. Right here, do the top, flick it down a little bit. The top, flick it down a little bit. Same process. And I'm doing a lighter touch as I'm getting lower. Let's just do the very top of that a little bit. I have a problem of using my nail to keep my hand steady, and then I end up with little white dots all over, so try not to do that. I'll have to cover that up later. I'll just use my knuckle. So we're just blending out those little shapes a little bit. And we're going to add highlights to make them stand out more in just a second. And then this one, let's just make that a little lighter at the top, feather it down. Okay, so let's take our tiny brush now, just so we can outline these shapes a little better. A little white, not pure white, just mix some white into some of that pink shade. And I'm going to dip my brush in the water again just to make it a little easier to draw with. And then I'm spinning my brush and dragging it to get it nice and pointy because I've got too much paint on it right now. So I'm spinning it, twisting it, dragging it flat. Then I have a much pointier tip, and then I can just take a little bit of paint on the tip. And I'm going to outline along these edges. Not a harsh outline, it should fade into the color a little bit, but you just want to see the definition between the petals, mainly at the tops of them. And a little bit on the edge, so it stands out. And it should blend into your paint a little bit, so it's not such a harsh outline because your paint should still be pretty wet. But we want to define some of these edges here so it separates it from the petal next to it. You can do it on this side. See, then it stands out a little more from that side. So we're just doing little arches on the tops of them. And you want some of these to overlap each other so they look like they're layered. If you want to add any extra ones to make it look more full, go for it. Let's brighten up this edge so it stands out from that one back there. I'm just going to go ahead and brighten up that petal from the top down, fade it down so it's a little darker at the base. Oh my gosh, I keep doing that with my nail. Ah! Let's brighten up this top edge. And again, fade it down a little. Now we can go in and brighten up the tops and fade them down. Brighten up some of those edges that we did before. Okay, so right now, actually let's brighten up this edge, that one's not standing out enough. So right now these colors look a little boring to me, like they're all just kind of the same shade, just with some white added. And you want to see more variety of colors in the petals. So I'm going to take my filbert brush again. I'm going to take a scoop of white, that spot's dry, and I'm going to take a teeny bit of yellow, wipe off some there, and I'm going to mix it into some of that white. I'm going to take a little bit of this pink color. I want to make kind of a peachy light shade. I don't want it to be bright orange, I just want a little bit of a peachy shade, and where all the light parts are. I'm just going to add, like the tips of all the petals, just going to add a little bit of this peachy shade. Again, not much paint on your brush, just a little bit. You might need to water your brush down a little bit. We're going to go back over it again with some white, but this will give it a little bit of a more interesting color, having just a little bit of that yellow in there. And just keep it kind of streaky. And again, having barely any paint on your brush, it'll show, the other layers will show through if you're just doing really thin swipes or with a little water mixed in. Some of those other colors will peek through. Let's do it anywhere where there's the lighter edge. Let's just do a little bit of this little swipe here and there. See how that's already starting to just kind of brighten it up and give it another level of color. I'm going to wet my brush a little. Ooh, that was a lot. Okay, that was really harsh. I'm wiping off a little more of that paint off my brush, so I don't want it to cover the whole thing. So I lost a lot of that dark, so I'm going to go back in. I'm not even going to clean my brush off. Take a little bit of that darker pink color that we had, and I'm going to blend this up. And I ran out of it, so I got to make a little more. Some magenta and a tiny bit of blue. I'm wetting my brush because it's too dry. I'm just going to paint that little base part. Get that a little wet. Take a little bit of the light pink, Blend that back down. Take a little bit of that peachy color and go from the top, blend it down. And just kind of play around with each of the petals till you get a nice mix of color and blend. It's got a little bit too much there. Okay, so we want to keep some of these darker, so I'm going to go back in with a little bit of the darkers, maybe some of those ones in the back, taking some of that dark pinky blend. Like, let's make this one a little darker. Start out the base and just lightly fade it up. Let's get a little darker behind this one, so behind that one. But this one, this one's in front, that one's behind. Let's do the one behind. Just fade it out a little bit. Go a little darker here. Make some more of that. Actually, I'm just using a little of the magenta. Wet my brush. So my brush is completely clean right now. I just cleaned it off, but it's a little bit wet. I'm just going to take a little bit of magenta. That's almost the pure magenta, very thinned out, and I'm just going to streak it on areas where I want some of those petals to be a little darker. It's just going to give it a little more of a pinky overtone. So that just kind of brightens it up a little. Do a little bit on this one behind. So we're making that one darker. Now this little petal's gonna pop more. And it'll make it obvious this one's behind that one. Put a little bit right at the base. Okay, oh, let's do a few little overlaps in front of that center of the flower. So let's take some of our light pink, if you have some of the light pink, and let's just do a few little petals popping up on top of that orange center, so it looks like it's more closing in on it. Looks more like it's closing in, I should say. Do a little bright highlight on it. Just do a few there. Maybe one more over there. Curve it. Take a little bit of that lighter shade and do just on the top. So you're just seeing a highlight of the edge of the petal. Okay, now we can add a little more white. And let's just hit the very tips of some of these little arched petals. Again, if you need to spin your brush and drag it to get that sharp point, that might help you get a finer line. And we can do a little white highlight on the tips of each of them. Again, you don't want it to be too harsh of a line, so just a real quick swipe. Okay, so guess what? My camera cut off on me, and I didn't realize it. I don't think I got too far ahead, but I tried to watch the tape back and see where it cut off. I think we only missed one step. And we're gonna add everywhere where we did like the light highlights. That's too much. Take some of the paint off your brush. Just very thin and watered down. The tips, we're just adding where all the light parts are, we're just adding a little bit of a peachy shade. So I'm just gonna redo it again. It's on there now, but we're just gonna Let's make this a little more, whoa, that's a lot more. A little more pinky peachy. Just to give a little more interest and have some different color in there. I'm gonna wash my brush off so I barely have any paint on my brush. And we're just kind of streaking it. So from the tips, just fade it down a little bit. Just a tiny bit. Just going like this on all of the parts just to add a little more color. Just a little swipe on these along that top edge. Fade it down just a little bit on all those parts. So that's, I think that's all you missed. I told you I am not tech savvy. But this one wasn't my fault. My camera didn't give me a warning. It didn't make a sound effect or anything. So we're just trying to add a few more layers of color on each of those. Then we're going to take the tiny brush with a little tiny bit of white, and we're going to add just a little bit on the tips of each of these, of every petal. Just a tiny bit, and we're just putting a little bit of white, just a little bit, right on the tips, just to add a little highlight. I think you saw the part where I added a couple more petals around the base of this. Hopefully you saw that. If you didn't, I just added a couple more little tips on this little center section here to make it look more full. And then on these edges, so anywhere where there's like the side that's closest to us, we're just gonna add a little highlight of white. You can thin it down a little bit with a little water so it's not quite so harsh. A little water. And then we're going to add a little bit of white on a few of these edges here, just to kind of separate them from each other. Twist it. Let's do a little bit on these edges here. Roll that edge there to make that stand out. Let's do a little on this edge, get that a little brighter. And then I'm going to take my filbert brush, I'm going to water down. Put just barely any paint on my brush, just very thin and watery down. I want to lighten up all these ones around here, so I'm just gonna very thin and water down from the top and just lightly flick it, feather it down. Let's brighten up this edge here. Come down a little lower. Let's get these a little brighter too. Bring some of that peachy color in there. Ooh. Too much, I should use a smaller brush. I'm going to put a little more magenta in there, just to get a light pink in some of these little ones here. Bring it down. I'm covering up a little bit of this dark contrast in here. So it's overall a little bit lighter in here. And let's brighten this up a little too. Take a little bit of that magenta and just bring a little bit of that into there. Bring a little more pink in there. So my brush is really clean and watered down. Very thin layer of magenta. Too much. Thin it down even more. I'm just going to take a damp brush with no paint on it really, and I'm just going to smudge this around just to kind of blend that out. And I just have, it's almost no paint on my brush. It's very watery. Just a tiny bit of thin magenta, and I'm just going over lightly in all the darker areas with just little pure magenta, just to pinken it up a little bit. Because I feel like it's got a little too much dark. I want to have more of a pinky feeling overall. So again, watered down. And you can use, some people like to use a glazing medium, which is going to do the same thing. It's just going to thin it out, but it'll just be very transparent. I just use water because it's easier and I have it right here, but glazing medium works too. And it will hold up the painting a little better, but water's going to be fine. So I'm just going over with a thin, transparent streaking. I might go back over with a little white too after on the light parts. I don't know, we'll see. Okay, take a little more white now and go over this edge. Look it down. It'll blend easier now that there's wet paint. Take a little bit of that peachy color. Mix some of that in. Go over it again with some of that peachy color because we lost it. Just on these petals around here. And then a little more white, just along the top. I got some blue in there, shoot. Switch to the little tiny brush. So hopefully you didn't miss much. Sorry about that. I'm just taking a little bit of white, thinned out, and again, hitting all the tips of the petals. There's a lot of back and forth with painting, at least when I'm painting. Everyone has their different ways, but I tend to just do a little bit and then pump it up, and go back in over it a lot of times. Okay, just a little swipe here and there. I don't want it to be a complete outline everywhere. It's a little too bright white for me. I'm just going to take my brush, water down, and blend it out a little. Take some of that peachy color, blend it out. If I'm speaking too quiet, comment down below and let me know, because I have a tendency to get quieter and quieter when I'm painting and talking at the same time. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I don't always realize I'm doing it while I'm doing it. That got a little too bright. I'm going to tone it down a little bit with some pink. I don't have any pink anywhere. There we go. If anything gets too bright, just take a little magenta, a little bit of the colors that we mixed before, and you can just go right over the top of it and fade it out a little bit. That's what I'm doing now. I'm just kind of going around, and if it feels like too much of an outline, I just want to tone it down. I'll just mix a little bit of the darker shade and then blend out a thin coat on top of it. Okay. It's very outliney looking to me, so I want to fade some of these. See how they're just so outlined? I want to blend it out a little bit more, so I'm going to take some magenta. See, I'm running out of space on my palette. You don't want to paint on top of the dry parts because you're going to start lifting up little pieces, which is what started happening somewhere over there. So just find a blank spot. Let's take some of that peachy color, make kind of a medium tone. Just want to fade these out a little bit. Oh man, how did that get there? I didn't see myself do that. You get a smudge on your painting, just take a clean brush, make sure it's really clean. Wet it, dry it off, and then you can just lightly lift it off. Or blend it in. Okay, let's see, where was I? Yeah, right there. I think, no, right there. Let's take a little of that peachy color. Gonna lighten this one up a little more. You don't want them all to look the same. So you want a little variation. Let's lighten this one up a little. Maybe the top of that one a little. Ooh, that's okay. And if you want to soften up any dark parts, you can just do a thin layer over the top of it. That's what I'm doing now, just little bits here and there, just kind of touching up areas that I don't love. I'm gonna lighten this one up a little. I just want these to be a little softer and more faded, more of a gradual fade, and so much contrast. Check and make sure my camera's rolling. Yes, okay, good. Okay, let's see. Let's brighten this one up a little. That one. At some point you just gotta stop, because I can just keep going. And if yours is at a good place where you're happy, just stop and wait for me to finish what I'm fiddling with here, and I'll get the rest of it. Okay, let me fade that one out a little. Sometimes you can just mess with it too much, which is, I feel like, what's starting to happen with mine. All right, I think I'm gonna, I was gonna say, I think I'm gonna stop, and then here I go. Okay, so we're gonna add a couple petals in the water. So we're gonna take a little bit of magenta and a little bit of blue to make kind of a purpley magenta color. And we're gonna add one right here. Not too long, we just want it to look like it's kind of peeking down from under the water in between those two petals. And it's pretty thinned out with water. I just want to keep this kind of a purpley shade. So it looks like the pink petal is under the bluish green water, so it's kind of a mix of the watercolor and the petal. Let's get a little more of that. And then let's do another one right here. I have this coming out at that angle. Right in between those petals. And maybe one more right here. Just a little hint of one. Just the tip of it. And have this kind of flat. You don't want to go in like that. So it looks like it's under the water at like an angle. Okay. Take a clean brush, thin that out. Oops. This brush is all old and fluffy, so it's not giving me a nice clean edge. Let's take a clean damp brush and wipe that away. Switch to my little brush. Okay. That's better. And then let's take a little bit, teeny little bit of white, mix it into that, put some magenta on there, and we're just gonna add a little bit on the tip of it. We don't want it as bright. I'm gonna switch to my filbert. We don't want it as bright as the other petals. We just want it to look like the sun's hitting the tips of it. Not that bright. Hold on. Just a little bit brighter. You could just make it kind of smudgy. Maybe just a little bit. Doesn't need to be solid, just tap a little bit on there, on top of the purple. Because you want the shadow, you want it to be darker here so it looks like there's a shadow from the flower on top of that. So just hit the edges of it a little bit, like that. And I'm wiping all the paint off my brush, so I just have a clean brush and I'm just sort of smudging it just to kind of fade it into it. Okay. All right, let's do the shadows in the water. So you can use your filbert brush. I find a better one. Okay, we're gonna make, remember, let me check my camera. Yes, still rolling. Okay. We're gonna make some more of that first watercolor that we did, the blue, a little bit of yellow. That's probably a good amount. So make it, actually need more blue. More blue. Definitely want it more blue than yellow. More blue, and then because we use this color in the darker areas, we need it to be even darker for the shadow. So we're gonna take a little bit of magenta and mix that in. So it's gonna make it a purpley water shade. And I'll make it a little bit darker. I got my brush wet and I'm just swirling it around in that color. Let's test it out. Let's see if it's gonna be, yeah, that'll be good. So get your brush a little wet and swirl it around so it's nice and thin. Wipe off some of that excess. So we're gonna create these shadows now. So we're gonna start off, let's do a little bit of a shadow. So this will have a shadow reflecting in the water. So we're gonna do just a little bit in between that petal we just added. Make that go right off the edge of the canvas. Wrap it around the side. Then this one, let's do this shadow. It's gonna be this shape here. So you're just kind of following along the shape. Let's have that come out like that. Then let's do a shape like this kind of coming out. So it would be like one of these, even though you don't fully see it. Let's just have that extend out a little bit. Again, by keeping it kind of thin and watery, it'll make it a little bit more see-through. And so it's not so solid. You'll be able to see a little bit of the texture that you did in the water. If you had texture in the water, it'll show through. Okay, and then let's do a little bump. So as if there's a petal, we don't really see the full shape of. Just adding another shadow there. And then we're going to do one coming out like this. And then we're going to do this shadow. So this leaf here, petal, we're going to have this come out a little bit like that. We don't want to just outline around it. We want it to look like it's underneath it. So we're going to start out right here. We're going to come out like that and keep it kind of, don't make it really wide. We're just going to make it look like it's right underneath it. Shadows and highlights are my favorite part because that's when it really starts to make things pop off the canvas. Oh shoot, I just keep making those little smudges. Let's clean that up. So right here, I'm going to do the same shape, but it's just going to come out a little bit below it. And a little bit flatter. So it's not going to be as wide, it's going to be a little flatter because it looks like you can't see the whole thing in the shadow. I don't know if that makes sense. It makes sense in my head, I just don't always explain it as well as I need to. And then this shadow is going to come down here lower because of the angle of the water that you're looking at it. So this is going to come down like this. Water that down a little more. And we can just go right on top of that petal. Let's see how that looks. We might need to add a little more pink afterwards. Maybe not. We'll see. No, I don't like that. We'll add pink on top of it. It made it too purple. I want it more of a pinky purple. Okay. Then let's go back in. Well, let's keep that same color. We'll go back and fix that petal after. And now let's add a little more around the edges of the bottom side. Just a tiny bit. I just want a little more. Just a little here and there. Here. I just felt like mine needed a little more. Okay. What else? Now, if you want to just create a little more light around this, you can. I think it's probably okay, but if you feel like you need a little more color in your water, you could take a little white, a little. Actually, wait, we don't want the shadow color. Where's my brush? I didn't mean that. I'm gonna take a little blue. Running out of space. Tiny bit of yellow. And a little bit of white. A little more white. My palette is a disaster. And I'm starting to lift up the dry paint underneath it. Don't do that. Find a clean spot. Don't do what I did. Do what I say, not as I do, right? And if you want to add just a little bit of this lighter around the edges of the shadow, you can. I'm going to clean off my brush. So I have just a damp brush, so it's a little more flowy and easier to blend. If you want, you don't have to do this part. but it will brighten up the edges of the shadow. Or it'll give more contrast. That's what I'm trying to say. And it's up to you. Maybe your water looks good and you're happy. You don't want to worry about this. And then don't do it. I just want to brighten it up a little bit. You can even do a few more little smudges around here and there if you want. See how that just kind of makes it pop a little more? I like that. And just fade it into the rest of the water. Brighten up a little more here and there too. And I had a little white showing on my canvas here that I don't like, so I'm gonna paint right up to the edge. This brush sucks. I need, that's an older one. I needed a one with the bristles are a little tighter because those were all spread apart, so it was just making it not easy to get up to the edge. And again, you might not need to be doing this. Maybe yours looks great. Okay, I think we are done. If you want to add any more little highlights anywhere, just to brighten up any spots. Okay, I might add a few little things. I might just brighten up a few little spots just to make it a little brighter in a couple places. Maybe the edge of that, so it's a little brighter on this side. That's actually probably a good idea. You should always have a stronger light source on one side. Okay. And if you want any little bright spots in your lily pad, you can brighten up a few spots there too if you want. Here's where it can just go on and on and on and on and on. Sometimes you just gotta say, okay, I'm happy, we're done. Because you could just spend hours and hours adding more and more. Sometimes it's hard to say, I'm done. So I am always open to suggestions you have for tutorials. I've gotten a lot of requests for more water tutorials, so definitely gonna do more of those. Well, my camera just stopped on me. Okay, I might just add just a few more little highlights around the lily pads. So I'm just adding a little bit of white to my watercolor. No, actually, I think I'm okay with that. Well, maybe add a little bit of green to the water just to have a couple. I'm just doing it real subtle. Just a few more little swirls here and there. Nah, blend that out with a wet brush. It's too like liney for me. Just want to spread it out a little more. Okay, I think I'm stopping. Gonna sign my signature. Let's see, let's do it up here. Oop. That's too harsh. I don't want it to stand out so much, so I'm going to take a little bit of that color of the water and add a tiny bit of white to it. I have a new signature. Okay, and then I'm going to add my little ladybugs that I always add to the side of all my paintings. They represent my two kids, if you don't know about that already. So I always just pick a spot on the side of my painting and I just hide two little ladybugs. I always put them in a different spot. There's that crappy brush again. Where's my good one? Here we go. I have so many of these 4 brushes that I use 4 brushes in all my tutorials, but we just needed 3 of them today since we're on a smaller canvas. But I have so many of them because when I had my art studio, I had tons of, I had like 50 of every size brush. So I got a lot of them. But I always save the, ow! Right on my toe. Sorry, poet. Almost on his head. What was I saying? Yeah, save your old beat up brushes because they are great for texture on paintings. Sometimes you need a rough, mashed up brush for certain parts. There's that little ladybug. There we go. So I do 3 dots for my daughter and 4 dots for my son. Because he's older, he gets an extra dot. I've been doing this since I was pregnant with Brielle in my belly. And it's just a little fun signature that I add to each one. Okay, let's add a little shadow behind it. They're nothing fancy. Just a little signature. Oh, there we go. All done. I hope you guys had fun. Hope that didn't last too long for you. I appreciate you so much for watching and let me know what you want to paint next. Bye.